Welcome to our Revolving Loan Fund Grant Perspectives around West Virginia session. Today we have 3 Revolving Loan Fund grant programs around West Virginia that we're going to be discussing, and hopefully helping to enlighten you all about revolving loan funds, or RLFs for short. So we have Melinda Midkiff here from the City of Huntington representing their RLF program, and Patty Hickman here. She's a senior advisor with the Environmental Standards Company, and she is representing the City of Weirton's revolving loan fund program. And unfortunately, John Gerard from West Virginia DEP couldn't make it today. He, I don't know if y'all know this, but DEP just inherited the DHHR's drinking water SRF program a couple months ago, and it's a bit overwhelming. Let me just say, just from looking at John when we meet monthly, it's quite a bit to tackle. And 6 people that came from DHHR to help, 2 just quit, and so he's trying to fill 8 positions already. So it's been quite a thing going on. So he could not make it. Totally understandable. I wish he could have been here to represent his side, which he is a Clean Water State Revolving Fund SRF program manager with DEP, and he has been helping through DEP's challenges. But we will bear through it. I'm Erin Britton. I'm the West Virginia DEP Brownfields Program Manager, and also the Brownfields Revolving Fund, or BRF, Program Manager as well. All right, so today we're going to discuss the basics of an EPA RLF and what to do after successfully being awarded the RLF grant, and projects that have benefited from RLF funding from the 3 RLF programs, and a few lessons learned as well. Looks like Ross may be getting the microphones, possibly. All right, so the EPA provides RLF grant funding to applicants in order to capitalize an RLF program. Oh, yay! Yay! Thank you. Thank you so much. No problem.
Just the power button at the bottom here.
Push up and hold.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Did you need to?
This should all be good to go, right?
That should all be working fine.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you all for bearing with us. Okay, so for those folks joining us virtually, we are just getting started, so you didn't miss anything other than introductions. So, all right. So the EPA provides RLF grant funding to applicants in order to capitalize an RLF program. The RLF programs can provide loans and subgrants to eligible entities to carry out cleanup activities at brownfield sites contaminated with either or hazardous substances or petroleum. Grant applicants can request up to $1 million, and typically RLF grant performance periods are 5 years. Applicants must typically provide a 20% cost share of the federal funds for RLF grants as well, but I'll talk a little bit more about supplemental funding later on in the presentation. Eligible RLF applicants are local government entities, meaning a county, municipality, city, town, township, local public authority, special districts, councils of governments, quasi-governmental entities, state, Indian tribe, regional councils, redevelopment agencies sanctioned by a state, and nonprofits. So it's a pretty wide range of entities that can actually apply for an RLF grant. As with all EPA brownfield grant applications, there are certain threshold criteria that must be met, and accordingly, the EPA will notify you if you have not passed the criteria. All requirements for the grant applications are included in specific grant guidelines. For FY24, so the grant application coming up any day now, the guidelines should be released. The RLF grant will not be an option to apply for this year, but should be able to apply next year if you're thinking about applying for an RLF grant. And EPA also allows RLF grantees to apply for RLF supplemental funding, typically on an every other year basis. If you're getting low on funding, if you've been a high performer. DEP did apply for RLF supplemental funding this year and will be successfully awarded $1 million in supplemental funding in October in just a couple weeks. And because the supplemental RLF funding is through infrastructure funds, the 20% cost share requirement does not apply. Okay, so there are many, many benefits to an RLF, including low or zero interest rates to eligible loan recipients and eligible sites. Repayment terms are typically very flexible. For example, DEP offers a 10-year repayment period for eligible recipients. Subgrants may also be awarded, again, depending on the recipient and project need. An RLF loan can fill the funding gap for a brownfields project and can absolutely be stacked with other funding, such as 104K assessment and cleanup grants. And on a side note, I wanted to mention that the RLF grant recipient cannot make a loan or a subgrant to a party who may be found to be potentially liable for the contamination at the brownfield site per Circular Section 107. In addition, the RLF grant recipient may not make a loan or subgrant to clean up the site for which the recipient is potentially liable under Circular Section 107. So like I said, in West Virginia, we have 3 active RLF programs, one in Huntington, one in Weirton, and of course DEP, which is a statewide program. In a minute, we'll discuss each of these programs in a little more detail, but I wanted to first also share some details about the RLF programs, which are designed to operate for many, many years, possibly decades, and as such, they require long-term resource commitments by the RLF grant recipient and ongoing reporting to the EPA even after the RLF grant is closed. Recipients need to have a strong understanding of real estate financing principles and approaches, including loan underwriting, loan servicing, and credit analysis, which I have none of that. Recipients need to have the ability to market the RLF program on an ongoing basis during the performance period of the grant and after the closeout of the RLF grant. Recipients must commit to properly manage funds and program income generated by their RLF program in perpetuity unless they terminate what is called a closeout agreement, or COA, and return any remaining program income to EPA. The COA kicks in after the RLF grant's performance period ends and the grant is closed. The COA must be signed by both EPA and the grantee. So I'm going to kick it over to Melinda, and so that she can talk a little bit more about the Huntington's RLF program. So Melinda, take it away.
So I guess my discussion, but I'll let you all know that I'm going to be for RLF since 2018. So as such, I'm going to have to be for a lot of started. So West Virginia is the largest inland port in the United States. Somehow. It has hopefully in most of the last century to boom industry. At the peak, I think in 1950, the peak population was about 80,000. As the economy changed, manufacturing industry kind of started to flutter away. The population dropped to below 50,000. I think it's changed now. That left a lot of blight and a lot of sites that have some environmental concerns. We also have the geography of the cities, a really kind of interesting situation where you're bordered by the river on one side and a lot of mountains on the other, which means that from an economic development perspective, there's not much land, flat land to develop that hasn't already been developed. So the logical step is to move towards these post-industrial sites. So one of the really key areas that stands out is just east of Marshall University in a neighborhood called Highline. And it just so happened that at one point there were hundreds of acres of different industrial investments in that area. So that kind of, because of proximity to the university, stood out as an immediate place of interest. In 2015 and 16, the City of Huntington worked with Region 3, our local regional planning agency, with a area-wide planning grant to develop what was and envisioned about 1 million square feet of redevelopment specifically in that Highline area. And then moving forward, the city also identified a couple of other key areas, one in the west end of Huntington and one in the Fairfield community, which is, if you've ever come to Huntington, it's we all power area coming to Fairfield. The city used 2 previous assessment grants to prepare some of these properties to see what we were getting into and, kind of create these target areas, and then we were ready for action. So I think unlike a lot of places that get the RLF and then the market, we kind of have some target areas already in mind when we apply. So we knew what we were going to do. The RLF in 2018, in the process of, creating the task force, the policies and procedures, all those things, because we never had an RLF before started. And then we moved forward. The Municipal Development Authority, which is kind of economic development wing for the City of Huntington, managed to get site control of one of the major properties that was identified on the Highline neighborhood in January of 2020. And that is the American Power Foundry, or OCF. Take a look at it in a moment. They were the major recipient of a combination of loans and grants that the City of Huntington utilized from and it's been a very successful project. We have also, I think we applied and were awarded a $500,000 supplemental grant in 2021 and just requested and received a 1-year extension. So we'll continue on until 2024. We have a little bit of loan funds left, and we're in discussion with one that's active. So I'm hoping that we'll get it worked out. Moving on to the next phase of our RLF adoption. You see this slide?
That's a little bit later. This is just talking about the program. Yeah.
So that's where we are.
All right. Patty, go ahead and talk to us about the City of Weirton's RLF.
Sure. So the City of Weirton also received their funding. They applied in 2018 and were awarded the $800,000. And as Aaron mentioned earlier, the city's obligated to make a 20% match. So the total comes to $960,000, same as Huntington's. When they applied, well, let me give a little background on the City of Weirton. They, if you were in a session yesterday with Mike Paprocki and Northern Six, talked a lot about that part of the Northern Panhandle, which is north of here in Wheeling. And Weirton Steel was a big employer for decades. Like, it's been there since the early 1900s. And they had at one time 13,000 employees, and now there might be a couple hundred left, So that entire property became vacant and unused, obviously, and had contamination issues from being a steel mill for over 100 years. And there's supporting industries that developed around that in Weirton also, and in the surrounding area. And, most of them have gone out of business just because they were supporting Weirton Steel. So there's 2 organizations in that area that have been working since the early 2000s to implement several assessment grants. One is the Brooke Hancock Jefferson Redevelopment Authority. They cover Jefferson County, Ohio, which is the Steubenville area, and then Brooke and Hancock County. So all the way down from Beach Bottom and Wellsburg and up north to New Chester with Weirton in the center. And the other organization is the Business Development Corporation of the Northern Panhandle. And they were alternating, basically, requesting assessment funds, and then they would work on various properties that had historic contamination and got the assessments done. Well, then you have the challenge of how do we clean them up? Where does the funding come from that? And I know that BBC had applied for cleanup grants at times, but everyone together looking at the big picture thought, hey, it would be great to have a revolving loan fund, and the City of Weirton would be the ideal candidate to apply for that funding. So that's kind of how that came into being, that they decided to apply for the funding. And so now they are able to take some of these properties where assessments have been done and they're starting to do cleanup on them, partially with the revolving loan fund. Just like Melinda said, the city had never had a revolving loan fund before, so there was all the process of going through putting together a team of advisors that had the appropriate backgrounds to be able to help make decisions, putting together what their policies were going to be for how the program would run, putting together the process for, people who apply for funding and the information they needed to provide to understand, whether they were qualified. We've mentioned, is it an eligible property? It also has to be, a company or person who is eligible too. So if they have defaulted on, something previously, as far as like an EPA loan or something like that, that could be an issue. And then they cannot have caused the contamination there. And, some of the other things that we have to look at are just, are they actually looking to use the funding for cleanup? So I'll give you an example. We have one where they were doing an asbestos removal, and that's fine. You can clean up the asbestos, but they could remove the asbestos without demoing the entire building and having all of that be contaminated. So the demo part of it has to be paid for another way, because that will be clean demolition material after the asbestos is removed. So you have to be careful to know whether using the funding is it appropriate. And once you make all those decisions, then you can get them through the loan process. Just like Melinda and Aaron talked about, there's a lot of flexibility on the length of time for repayment of the loan. I know in Melinda's program, the loan that they have currently has up to 30 years payback, although they'll not take that long. Yeah. But exactly, you won't care, huh? And Weirton kind of went with like a 10-year time frame, but they have flexibility to lengthen that if it's appropriate for the type of project that it is. So that's pretty much about Weirton's program.
All right, and so a little bit about DEP's RLF. We were awarded $820,000 in 2016, and we also have the 20% cost share. So the total is, I think, $984,000. The Office of Environmental Remediation, or OER, is the office where the Brownfields Revolving Fund is housed. And so we literally were starting the RLF from scratch, the whole BRF program from scratch. We decided to partner with DEP's Clean Water State Revolving Fund Program, or SRF, which has been around for many, many years and is a very robust and mature revolving loan fund program. So it took us several years to get up and running. And initially we had 2 interested applicants. And I know I told them probably a dozen times each, like, thank you so much for your patience as we navigated through getting this up and running. And we really, really did appreciate them hanging with us. So we did not issue our first loans until May of 2022. So it did take us nearly 7 years to get to that point. And that was, I know, trying their patience. And internally it was, definitely hair pulling out and, how can we get from point A to point B a little bit quicker? But we did get there. And as Patty mentioned, getting a team of advisors and a committee together, and that's what we ultimately did. We got a team of, it's called a BRF committee. We meet monthly, and we discuss every project. We discuss, the terms and conditions, and whether it's a good option to fund, whether with a loan or subgrant or both. and it's a great committee. You know, there were growing pains at first, but it's a great committee at this point after we've had 3 successful applicants. So when we do have interested applicants, we set up kickoff meetings with the committee. And so it's just very informal. We, of course, during the years of COVID, we just do it virtually now. And so we just meet with their, whoever their point of contact is, and just discuss the project and whether it would be good and what the future holds and what redevelopment plans they may have. And it's just a really good discussion as a kickoff point. So we pair with the Clean Water SRF program, and we also use their external legal team as well. And so that pretty much makes up our committee with the Brownfield staff, SRF staff, and external legal team. So we created all of our forms. We've got 20-some forms. The most important is a funding agreement that EPA had to review and approve as well. And we also develop marketing materials and a BRF guidance manual that are, all of those materials are on our website as well. And anytime I get asked a question, I have to go to the guidance manual myself, because there's so many ins and outs to an RLF. All right.
That guidance manual, that's something that you created?
We internally, yes, DEP created the BRF guidance manual. I'm sure I was not a part of, again, like Melinda said, I'm number 4, I think, as well, managing this thing. So it was my predecessors that put this together. I assume they probably looked at some other states' programs. I mean, why reinvent the wheel? I'm just guessing. And we've updated it once. It needs to be updated again whenever I find time to do that. But all of that is on our website. All right, so like I said, RLFs need to be marketed early and often, just like voting. If you're thinking about applying for an RLF grant, be sure to include marketing supplies and materials and personnel time, because it does take quite a bit of time. So, and you have to, like I said earlier, you have to keep ongoing marketing. And so making sure it's, you know, it's being talked about and you're being heard throughout the state or community. I would recommend before you apply, you have a solid team or committee with roles clearly defined. Don't be afraid to ask other RLF grant recipients for their forms, templates, guidance manual. Again, no need to reinvent the wheel. And be like DEP. We've had to ask for several extensions, and it's perfectly fine. It happens because RLFs are designed to last 10 to 15 years at minimum. So Patty and Melinda, do you have any streamlining tips you would like to share as well?
Probably the only thing I would add to what you said about looking at other states and other programs for RLFs. CDFA also has a lot of information on revolving loan funds in general, and also specifically brownfield revolving loan funds. And I know that's where we got a lot of the information in working with Dawn Seaver in Huntington. She and I put together the policy manual in Huntington and Weirton, and we got a lot of the information from there, and we even got a lot of the forms. Obviously having to adapt them to the individual situations. But it was a great resource, and the training that they had, I attended it back when I was still at DEP, and it was fabulous. You know, really gave you a good foundation for kind of understanding how these programs operate. So if anyone's considering, you know, taking out RLF grant from EPA, you may want to consider participating in some of that training, but definitely connect with others who have done it before. So there's some very mature programs out there.
And what was the name of that organization?
It's give me a minute, and I will give you the name for the acronym.
I will just say, from the point of view of the city of Huntington, the third point on this slide, the team structure with clearly defined roles, I cannot emphasize that enough, especially if you're a unit of local government where, everything can change in 4 years, it often does, and you're the benefit of having, the second mayor for three, the end of 3 terms now, but council members change, your priorities can change, you have staffing issues. Just make sure that you have the capacity and the role very clearly defined, that you have, it's something as simple as like a shared drive with all of the information that you created out there, so that, when a new person comes out there, that can't be emphasized enough. It's difficult to manage, and you want to make sure that if there's a smooth transition, you do have your.
It's the Council of Finance Development Agencies. And it's a national organization. And I just thought of another thing, where Linda was mentioning, having a place with shared information and all those kind of things. You may have outside members of your advisory team. I know, it's especially if you're a small community, Weirton certainly is small. So they brought in like an outside attorney as an advisor, an outside banking representative. And then they have advisors from the real estate and development community and the Chamber of Commerce, just to kind of help them with all aspects of the program.
Okay, so now we're going to get into kind of the nitty-gritty of each of the 3 programs. So for a little bit more information on DEP's RLF, like I said earlier, we have a BRF committee it comprises of, I think, 8 or 9 people. We meet monthly. We set up kickoff meetings with interested applicants. As soon as we can, as soon as one of us is contacted, we set up a kickoff meeting whenever our schedules will allow. And the first step in our process is to have the applicant submit a threshold eligibility questionnaire. And if it passes, DEP protocol, then I send it to EPA for approval as well. And again, that is just to make sure they're not potentially liable. All the boxes are checked appropriately. And then once we get EPA's approval, we then request the BRF application. And that's really the meat of okay, what's the project? Who's the applicant? What's the financing? What's your budget? What's your redevelopment plan? It's pretty involved and intense. So that's what I review, and I nitpick that thing to make sure everything is in place before I hand it over to our SRF folks to really do the loan servicing and underwriting and all of that. So the application must describe the applicant and the project for both cleanup and redevelopment plans, and the application must include a budget of project cleanup costs. Already gone over our committee. So for DEP's RLF, we have issued funding to 3 projects so far. The first one, well, the first 2 actually closed on the same day, which was also crazy, and I would not recommend that either. So those 2 projects are the Hampshire Memorial Hospital site in Romney and the Pinwheel enclosure site in Wheeling. And then the third site is the Morgantown Smokestack site, which is a former World War II power plant in Morgantown. And most everyone, if you've gone into Morgantown, you see those 4 smokestacks, which are still there. So sites with soil and groundwater contamination must enter DEP's Voluntary Remediation Program, or VRP. Sites that just have like building material contamination, like asbestos, lead-based paint, that require abatement, they do not have to enter the VRP. And as I mentioned earlier, DEP will be receiving the $1 million in supplemental RLF funding in October. And if anyone here has a project in mind, please come see me afterward. I'd love to talk with you. And DEP's videographer, Mike Huff, has been around here He's the one that produces all the Environment Matters videos for DEP, and he's done a few of our RLF sites videos, and they are all so fantastic. So I want to try to show one. Well, I will show that a little bit later on. I'm going to get through some challenges first. So hold on to your seats. So for challenges, and I think you've kind of heard it from Patty and Melinda as well, these things are not easy. It requires long-term commitments. I think we've all gone through retirements and turnover, and it's just so vital to have all the documentation in place, all the materials in one share drive, for example, like Melinda said. In DEP, we have our own offices and our silos, of course. So our share drive, we didn't even share it with SRF folks. So then we had to set up a new share drive as well. So, and again, all of this, got to 6 to 7 years before we issued our first loans. We had to work through all of retirements. We had to work through a reorganization in 2017 internally. And so thank goodness we had the Clean Water SRF folks to lean on, because we definitely leaned on them to get us through the learning curve. We've learned that expenditure schedules are not easy to understand both internally and externally, and that's okay. These RLFs require just such long-term commitments. Again, like I said, some can go as long as 15 years. And then you start the closeout period, which takes it, even longer. So I'm not sure if I will be around once this thing, gets closed out in the future. I may retire first, who knows? Okay, so for the individual sites, our first applicant was the City of Wheeling for the Pinwheel Enclosure Project. The site is an approximately 2-acre former factory in the East Wheeling neighborhood. And I know we've talked to the Mayor Elliott a few times, and I know he's talked about this neighborhood, and it's on that cusp of being the next to be revitalized. And this property has a long history of manufacturing beginning in the 1800s. Since its construction, the site has supported operations as petroleum refinery, city gas works, chemical manufacturer, metal hinge manufacturer, glass manufacturer, and metal container lid manufacturer. And I think I even left off a few. In 1997, Americo purchased the site, which has sat vacant and blighted ever since. The City of Wheeling purchased the site in 2020 and subsequently entered it into our voluntary remediation program at DEP. In May 2022, we issued both a loan and sub-grant to clean up the project or clean up the site. And the city doesn't have any redevelopment plans yet. They did when they applied. I don't think they're going to follow through with those redevelopment plans. I think they were thinking of building a public safety building. I don't think that's what's going to happen now, from what I've heard. I don't know if anyone has that. Patty lives here in Wheeling, and Lydia, I don't know if you know.
They actually took one of the old buildings across the street from the OVMC hospital that was going to be demoed, and it was in good enough shape to rehab. So that is the new police station. And then there's another property just a couple blocks from Penn Wheeling that was ready, and so they're going to go ahead and they're actually constructing the fire department there now, and it'll be in operation probably by the end of the year. But the timeline at Penn Wheeling didn't fit what they needed. So
yeah, absolutely. So I know the buildings are down, and it is going through the process of VRP. I think site assessment is just about done. So we're excited to see what happens in the future at this property. Okay, the next site. Again, this was both of these sites closed on the same day in May of 2022. This is the Hampshire Memorial Hospital site in Romney. The hospital was built in 1957 and served the community until 2001, where it sat vacant and abandoned. The Hampshire County Development Authority, or HCDA, purchased the site, and in 2018, an EPA performed phase 1 and 2 site assessments through their targeted Brownfield Assistance Program, or TBA program. In late 2021, the HCDA applied for RLF funding, and then in May 2022, we again issued both a loan and subgrant to HCDA. And concurrently, the HCDA applied for CDBG, I think that's Community Development Block Grant funding, for demolition, and they were successful, which we were so excited about. And they were awarded that around the same time, I think about maybe a year earlier. And so they had to wait for the RLF funding to come through in order to do asbestos abatement. It was found kind of all throughout the building, including the crawl space, which was a little odd, and a little bit in the soil as well. So they were able to do that. Let me back up here just for a second. I found that picture from 1957 for the dedication of the hospital just on the internet, of course, and I love that picture. And then the two bottom pictures there are actually the demolition of the hospital, which was occurring over the summer. And I talked with Eileen just this morning, Eileen Johnson, who's the former director at the HCDA, and she said the building is down, completely down, which is so exciting. I don't know how many years she worked on this project to see it through, but I mean, isn't that like every Brownfields project? It just takes years and years and lots of pots of funding to get it to happen and get it to this place for redevelopment. So let's see. So we stacked a lot of funding. Obviously, I just said EPA did TBAs. We also did a phase 1 for them using our current $2 million C5 Street 104K grant, assessment grant, to do a phase 1 because the property should be transferred over to the Hampshire County Board of Education to build a new elementary school here any day now. And it's just really exciting to get to this point. Eileen, how many years did you work on this?
Since we started the 2016.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. 7 years, and we're almost there. She just retired in June, and I know she really wanted this to be done before she retired, but luckily she's still around, and we can applaud her accomplishments here today. So as promised, I have a short video. I will probably need to. Uh-oh. Okay. I just have to find the mouse. Oh, okay. It's over there. Can't see it on the screen. Yeah. Well, oh, yeah, it doesn't have the play, and I don't know how to. Bear with us because I really want to play this video. Oh. Yeah, I was screen sharing, so I didn't want to do that, but I will try to get this. Thank you. I know screen sharing has stopped. I will try to get this share screen. Here we go. Share. Oh, now the volume.
Opened in 1959, the Hampshire Memorial Hospital served the healthcare needs of the city of Romney and the surrounding communities for decades. It was closed and replaced by a new, modern facility bearing the same name in 2011. The original 40-bed facility was funded in part by the Hill-Burton Act of 1946 that provided grants and loans to encourage the construction and modernization.
Trying to find the sound. This one? This one? Ah. What's that? Right here. You're used sharing sound from your computer. No. Well, this one? No. Yeah, thank you. Well, try that.
Of hospitals in underserved communities.
Nope.
It actually became the heart
There's Eileen.
of this community that allowed the community to go from very rural to becoming a thriving, sustainable community here in Hampshire County.
Today, it's surrounded by chain link. Its once bustling interior, dark, quiet, and empty, just waiting for its date with the wrecking ball.
There was a lot of emotional attachment to the building. As you can see, the building had really, really good infrastructure and good bones. So with the Development Authority started working with DEP West Virginia Brownfield, the Citizen Assistance Center in Morgantown, and we started to look at how we could repurpose this, what we might be able to do. And we started with different programs, did community visionary planning sessions, and decided the best use of this would still be of public benefit. And then the time and the elements happened.
A leaky roof and back-to-back harsh winters caused enough water damage that, combined with some environmental contamination issues, made rehabbing the building cost prohibitive. That's where the DEP's Brownfield Revolving Fund Program comes in.
EPA did a Phase 1 environmental site assessment in 2018
So I am just
and
saying
a Phase 2
all of the
environmental site
assessments
assessment
that
as well.
happened
So
throughout the years.
Phase 2 is
And this one
actual
is just a
soil
classic
and groundwater
example of
sampling
all of the different funding
to
stacking
see if
that
there
had
is
to
any
occur,
contamination
in
actually
order
on the
just to get
site.
the building
So
down
there was
and the
very
site ready for
limited
redevelopment.
contamination that was actually found, mostly just asbestos around pipe fittings and wrappings in the crawl space of the hospital. So the Hampshire County Development Authority reached out
asbestos was
to
found actually.
me in the
more asbestos
Brownfields
was
Revolving
found.
Fund Program. And
Right at the last minute,
they
of
were
course.
looking at getting a low
And,
interest loan
Eileen,
through the revolving
who was the
fund
funding source that
to
was able to do that last
abate the
hurdle of
asbestos and
abatement?
get it ready for demolition.
This is the second project helped through the DEP's Brownfield Revolving Fund Program, which provides low-interest loans to help jumpstart brownfield projects like Hampshire Memorial Hospital and the former Penn Wheeling Closures Factory in Wheeling that need a little extra help to get rolling.
We give a very good, obviously low interest, really great terms and rates, and we can defer payment for a couple years. We can go as long as 10 years before reimbursement starts. So that's why it's really just so vital for some of these brownfield sites that have sat around vacant and abandoned for so long. When a developer is interested, that little piece of gap funding, if you will, to go ahead and get a project started and redeveloped.
The project is probably one of the
Because that was
most
another
exciting
$300,000 of
infrastructure
asbestos
projects
abatement.
that's happening in the community
Yeah.
because there are so many stakeholders involved at a local level, at a regional, at a federal level. So many different divisions have come together with funding, with resources to make this project possible. It's so gratifying to know that this site that served this community since the 1950s, and you can't talk to anybody in the Romney, Hampshire County area or the surrounding area that doesn't have a memory of this place, good or bad. There's a connection here. So to know that this isn't just going to be leveled down to a greenfield space that obviously in today's world is probably a lot more marketable to outside interests outside the state, but is in essence going to be repurposed. The new school will be built here.
Once the demolition is completed and the DEP has conducted additional environmental site assessments to ensure all the contamination issues have been resolved, the property will be turned over to the Hampshire County Board of Education, which plans to build a new West Elementary School on the site. If you'd like to find out more about the DEP's Brownfield Revolving Fund Program, visit our website, dep.wv.gov. In Romney, I'm Mike Huff for Environment Matters. Thanks for watching.
And they ended up giving us the grant funding into our project. So I can't stress enough the importance of, first of all, knowing the project, knowing what you want the outcome to be, and then also knowing what the resources are out there for you. Everybody worked so hard to make this happen, so many levels, at the state, federal, at the local. It was just it took a village.
Yeah.
And a state.
Yeah.
But it's down, and we're also excited that that property and that structure start that community for 200 years, not 20, about 100 years. And now we're hoping that it's going to still serve that community in a public, with a public benefit as a community school. So we're really, really happy.
Yes. Thank you, Eileen. I should have asked you to be on our panel as well. But that's exactly what she said during the video is she's just so thrilled with this project, and it took so many years to get us to this point. And she's thrilled that this project will end up being a school and serving the community further for another however many decades. And it's really exciting to get there. I should mention all of our Environment Matters Brownfields videos are on YouTube. If you search for Environment Matters and look under the playlist tab, we actually have our own Brownfields playlist, which is very exciting. And you can look at any of these videos, and Pinwheeling also has a video as well. But I showed it last year and I didn't want to have to repeat. And Leah's probably excited about that because she's in the Pinwheeling video as well as Matt. All right, so the third and final one that we have funded is the Morgantown Smokestack site. And this is another one where there was multiple stacked funding layers to get us to this point. And as I said earlier, it was a former World War II power plant. And the 4 stacks still exist today. At one point throughout the history of the cleanup, there was talk about taking the stacks down, but I think it was just way too expensive in the end to do that. So the site sat vacant for nearly 50 years after the power plant shut down. In 2019, the property owner at the time transferred the property to the West Virginia Land Stewardship Corporation in order for the corporation to apply for an EPA Brownfields cleanup grant. The corporation was awarded a $500,000 cleanup grant in 2020, but as so many brownfield projects go, as cleanup was just about to finish up, some holding tanks were found that had collected sediment for decades. So, sorry, I wasn't using the microphone. The corporation came to us at DEP, and due to these very specific circumstances, the BRF committee agreed to issue a subgrant to cover the remaining sediment removal costs in order to complete the project. The subgrant was issued just a few months ago in June. And the site already has redevelopment plans in place, with the property owner adding a new railroad spur to be able to increase barge traffic there on the Mon River, because the site sits just on the Mon River. It's estimated that this redevelopment will support between 150 to 200 jobs at the Morgantown Industrial Park. And that's so exciting. That's exactly why we do this, is to clean up and also spur jobs. And it's a really exciting project. that's Joe there. We took a selfie at the smokestack site. We went there earlier this year. I forget when, March or April, something like that, March. And that's Craig, one of the new EPA project officers there, along with me, Casey, and Jackson on the Brownfields DEP team. It was a great day, although it was rainy and cold. We also had pizza there. I know I talked about, we eat pizza all the time, apparently, at Mannington, and we went and had pizza afterward in Morgantown. I forget the place. Yes, thank you, Katie. Yes, Mountain State. We did at the brewery. We did not drink, honestly. I think that I probably need a drink after this. Okay, I am switching over to Melinda now to talk more about Huntington's RLF program.
I think I'll give you a spiel earlier about our application process. As far as the administration goes, I have actually been through the process. As I mentioned, we do have an applicant right now that is in. I think our process is probably very similar to what they are outlined. We have a questionnaire that we start with, and we have as discussed earlier, our success is really we had one major subgrant fee, and that was the Huntington Municipal Development Authority for the ACO side. We've had a combination of loans and subsidies. And then, as I mentioned, we have both the supplemental funding and the grant extension. I do think that part of our success, and I mentioned this earlier, was in having a targeted area for redevelopment. So we have a benefit of not having to go out there and market or RLF. I think that's I don't know that's part of what I had to do to go out there and manage discussions. But move on to challenges.
Yep. Yep.
So let's be clear, so we'll need to say the line. Like I mentioned, I'm the fourth RLF manager with City of Huntington. We've had a significant staff turnover. One actually due to COVID. The grant was received in 2018. The ACS site control was in January of 2020, and we all know what happened after. So, I think that a big portion of our issues with discrimination probably are largely due to COVID. We were shut down and ordered to work from home for a number of months. People were before, so there were a lot of communication issues. And when I say communication coordination, I mean not just within your department, but especially if you're a unit of local government with your finance department, making sure that your comptroller, the person who helps work on your city's audit, all those people are aware of what you're doing, that there's good communication about match requirements, how you're going to handle that. You don't want to be the person who comes to your finance director 5 years later to say, hey, you write a check for us. We have a budget about, you don't want to be that person. And then the time commitment. So my actual job title is financial analyst for the Department of Development. I administer the city's CDB and ESG funds. The title is overseas. This is an extra pass, and it's a major commitment. There are lots of weeks where I can see a call coming from McDonald's. Let's go. That's and not that I don't enjoy this. So the time commitment is significant. And then looking at the closeout, making sure that you've got the capacity long term. As we mentioned, once you do close out this grant, there's still a repayment, and maybe a revolving loan fund that has to be managed long term. Just making sure that if you're going out of pocket, these funds have got long term capacity and long term staffing for the it's been quite interesting to act to, we didn't even have a carrier office that had all our forms and everything, like cobbling together all these pieces from different people. It's a little bit annoying, to be honest with you. So, let's go on to the ACS slide. So, redevelopment authority, as I said, purchased the American Park and the Boundary facility. So ACF, as it's also known, is almost the City of Huntington. City of Huntington was chartered in 1871, and the Enzyme Coal Works, which became this facility, started in 1872. So it's been a major employer in the Huntington area for a very long time. I think it's 1,600 employees, everybody in the Huntington area knows who work there. The site manufactured over its years various kinds of rail cars, and even during World War II, the manufactured tanks for a period of time as part of the war effort. And as you look at the history of it, there's even in the original buildings an area where there were horses to draw the carts, pull the equipment. So kind of very interesting history. Over the years, I think in the late 2000s, that they had maybe 30 employees, a lot of people just doing maintenance on some of the cars, and then factory people. And I mentioned earlier the location. Again, this is just immediately east of Washington University, and it's along 3rd and 5th Avenues, which are major corridors in the city too. So it's a very prominent location. I think once we moved into it, there was, I don't know, do you know how many structures there were completely? It's pretty significant, but I think every structure was contaminated with asbestos just because of that, the time frame for which things were built. There was some soil and some groundwater contamination. The project was entered into the voluntary program as well, for we'll deal with that for some period of time. All right. There is one building that has been we've left it standing because I can't think of the right words. I don't know if you can see it from this photograph, but there's a building that has it's got some architectural significance. It's got a sawtooth roof. That's been retained. That's the one I was looking for. And that will be the future town of the Western University Advanced Manufacturing Center. I think there's a couple of other, one site as part of this is going to be the Washington University Baseball Stadium. And then there's I think some facility for West Virginia American Water. Those sites all have been development stuff resulted from this. The development of the ACF site has also leveraged about 8.2 million in Build Back Better funds to the municipal development authority. So, there's a lot of things that can happen with these sites. Go on, here we go. We just clean up and leverage a lot of those dollars, especially for the project. That's what
So, the application process is pretty much the same as Huntington's and West Virginia DEP's for the City of Weirton. Administration, they expected to have more capacity internally at the city because the city planner, when this was originally applied for, they were envisioning a program manager was going to be hired. It was going to be doing a lot of the administrative work on the grant. And that kind of didn't happen. They hired a program manager. The city planner left. When he left, they moved the program manager up into his position. She was there for a very short time. They never did hire a program manager again. And then the former city planner came back, but he's on his own now. They haven't hired a program manager. So some of the tasks, such as the reporting to EPA or keeping track of the grant finances, not the loans or anything. That is something that my company has been helping them with. And then, obviously, as the loans are paid out and the repayments come back in, the city is tracking that through their typical finance system. Successes, there are 3 small projects that were done by BDC, where they requested loan funding on the first two, and on the third one, because it was a little more expensive, they requested to have part of the money as a sub-grant, which was granted. And then there's a pending application that's being reviewed currently. That's a larger project. In fact, there's probably not enough funding left to complete it, just with the RLF. And it is on a property in Voluntary. So even though we're applied for this RLF, they actually applied for it to be able to use it in both Broken Hancock. So they can use the funding outside the city. And as I mentioned, the one property to get a sub-grant for the asbestos removal that they needed. Because they got a little bit of a slow start, which I'll talk about in a minute, they did request an extension. So they currently have a 5-year extension on their grant. They want to be able to continue it long term. They want to be able to keep the revolving loan fund going and continue to assist with properties in that region. So challenges, again, the time commitment. Pretty much the administration is following all on the city planner, other than like the financial tracking of the loans. And so they have had to, probably use more funding for the outside contractor than they have for personnel, which was not what was originally envisioned. They have had staff and city administrator turnovers. I think they're on their 4th city manager since the grant started, and they're, in a way, even though he's come back as the 3rd city planner since they started. They have a new mayor, a whole new city council. So there's a lot of re-education stuff that has to be done. They've had at least one turnover on their task force that oversees this program. The banking representative had to step back because he left the industry. And so they had to request someone new come on and serve on the task force. Initially, there was this brilliant vision when they applied for this RLF grant. Remember that Weirton steel site we talked about, and all the property there that needed redeveloped. There was this vision because at that time, the owner thought that they were going to want to utilize these funds. And so that company, Frontier Properties, was listed as like a major user of this RLF. Well, as it turned out, as the timing all worked out, they had other funding sources become available, and they didn't utilize any of this funding. Well, so now we talked about marketing. That's kind of the boat that the City of Weirton was in. They needed to get the word out that this money was available and start talking to other people who might be able to utilize it. It was at the start of COVID, so that was a bit of a challenge, but they do have a web page. They did put together some marketing brochures. I mentioned that they have representatives from the real estate development and the business industries. And so those folks have talked to their members and spread the word too. So some of the funds, subsequently were used. So this isn't how the EPA grants come out now, but formerly they came out as you either requested hazardous substance money or you requested petroleum money. You could request both, which is what the City of Weirton did. The majority has hazardous substance. But they had a lot of little gas stations, and they thought, oh, there's going to be cleanups needed on those gas stations, so we'll request petroleum money too. Well, again, those gas stations have been cleaned up and redeveloped with different funding. So they have utilized over 300,000 of their hazardous substance money, but they still have all 140,000 of their petroleum money left that they originally started with. So trying to evaluate recipient qualifications. The first two applications they had were from a nonprofit that's longstanding, very well known, and obviously has some pretty straightforward finances. So those reviews were very simple. This latest applicant is a complex, publicly traded corporation with any number of subsidiaries, and the property has been through some of those subsidiaries. You know, just as they were doing different things. And the corporation itself is 40 years old, but the current subsidiary that owns the property is probably only about a year old. So the finances are a little more complicated. That's taking a little bit of time. So I just wanted to show some pictures of how this money was used. The Beach Bottom Industrial Park, if you listened to Marvin Six talk yesterday, it was a large corrugating plant, which they purchased and thought they would demo, but they've actually had new businesses come in and lease. So the large plant property itself has had a lot of cleanup done on it, and they have new companies in there using it. But they had an old wastewater treatment plant from the old process. And so stuff had to be cleaned up. It was hazardous waste that had to be removed from the equipment before they could, you know, just send the equipment for recycling or to the landfill. And so what they used the funding for was to be able to empty and clean out the tanks and the equipment and properly dispose of that waste. And then there's a building in Weirton, in the Weirton Industrial Park, that was just called the MBS building. And again, it had gone vacant, so the Business Development Corporation purchased it. And when they went in, there was all kinds of drums of things around, you know, a lot of material that needed disposed of. They wanted to be able to use the building. And so that was what they used the funding for there, was to get rid of all those waste, particularly the drums. And then you see that they have a clean warehouse they can use. And then the last project, again, it was an asbestos project. The money's not being used to demo the building, but it's being used to remove all the asbestos. And it was still in process when we were up there last month. They are finished now, but they haven't done the demolition yet. And they're taking this building down. And the reason that we went ahead and granted part of the funding instead of just lending it, it is not going to have like an economic recovery. Like there's not going to be income coming in on this property, because what they're trying to do is support an event center down the street by providing more parking for it. So it's not like they're going to gain anything, you know, by using a parking lot. So we went ahead and gave them the grant for a portion for it.
Yeah. All right. So in conclusion, if you're thinking about applying for an RLF grant, you can do it. I know we've said, you know, it takes a lot, you know, it's long-term commitments and it's not an easy thing to do, but once you're up and running, it falls into place much easier. And I think these RLFs are really vital gap funding sources for these brownfields projects that otherwise there may not be that last piece of funding available. And as interest rates rise, ours are still at either zero or very low interest rates. So I think it's still pretty attractive for folks out there who need that last bit of funding. So we can open it up to questions. I think we've got about 10 minutes before lunch. If anyone has questions, feel free. Yes, Eileen.
You have to give the money back if you don't for redevelopment.
Yeah. It's, you can turn it up there. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot once you close out, and the repayments or program income. And if you don't continue to utilize it for, brownfields eligible projects, it's really gonna impact you.
And then this is the question, I'm not sure who said what, but, I think this is a weird question for Ed.
Yes.
You were mentioning two economic development groups that are involved, Hancock Jefferson redevelopment.
Mhm.
The other one. My question is, so do you see, are there I'm not dangerous, but is it challenging when you cross state lines in programs?
Joe probably can talk a little better about it because he was involved a little, but it was challenging for them with applying for grants because the Brook Hancock Jefferson in particular is covering projects in 2 states. And so Ohio is actually a different EPA region. It's not the same EPA region. And that was kind of what complicated it. But they were able to work that out. The 2 regions worked together. And I know some of the funding's been applied for. Has some of it been done in Region 5? I know some's been
Yeah,
done.
it has, you know, that wasn't an RLF, those were
No.
assessment grants. So,
Correct.
that sort of, I guess made it easier, but I guess, you know, work done in Ohio still falls under the Ohio ADP, things like that. And the consultant, you know, obviously works with the state issues of that. But as far as the grant management goes, the deal that we struck with Region 5 is wherever the applicant is, whatever state they fall into, that we would manage it. So BHJ, they applied for it, was under the West Virginia side.
Mhm.
And that's why, you know, we handled the work in Region 3.
And the Bellamore Regional Council in this county is doing the same thing, because they cover a county in Ohio, but they applied through Region 3 and it's being administered through Region 3. So, but if you're in the same state and you have a couple of groups, you can do what they call a coalition grant. I don't know if you sat in, you know, for that session. And you can have 3 entities kind of apply together, maybe for a larger pot of funding than just one can. And there is one who's kind of the lead agency, and they're the one that's going to kind of be responsible and do all the reporting and everything. But the other 2 are involved in deciding on how the funding gets used and for assessment grants. Yes, Lydia.
Yeah, I would add that a lot of them sound very intimidating. Right, that you can use some of that funding to hire a consultant or a contractor. Right, and make use of that continuity in long term.
Yeah, I think what I would say is if you are a very small community and you think your, you know, like your city or town office, whoever's applying, if you think you don't have a lot of capacity, I think you have a couple of choices. I think one choice is to pull together a team and the team makes a long-term commitment, you know, that they're going to be willing to run this RLF with you, whether that team is, you know, outside experts or experts from other organizations that you work with all the time. And then your other option would be to get outside help, like hiring a consultant to help you with the parts that you just can't continue to manage. You know, obviously you're still going to do a lot of the work yourself, but you know, we do things like, you know, take first looks at like the initial questionnaire, are you eligible or not, and work with EPA on are they eligible. And the city's involved, they know everything that's going on, but you know, we kind of, you know, if they didn't answer all the questions, we go back to the applicant and say, look, you have to answer these questions. Those kind of things, so that the city doesn't have to spend that time.
When you get audited, I assume you have to audit. I mean, are you an independent audit or are you able to ask to the city of
So the city's going to be, yeah, I mean, the city's going to do their audit and you can talk about that.
Yeah, you know, the City of Huntington is great. So, you know, there's the funds over the City of Huntington, so it's all these brownfield funds become part of the city fund. All the other declared federal funds the city receives. Now, that we brought up what is an point federal, whoever your subgrants is, we need to understand that single audit threshold, if they're receiving additional federal funds or, they may not get over the 750, which is the threshold in Brownfields funds, but if they have other federal funds that could potentially push them into a single audit status, which they would need to be prepared for.
And then the other thing I would say is EPA does audit some of the grants. And so the city or whoever the applicant for that grant was has to be prepared, just like for an assessment or a cleanup grant, they have to be prepared, to show EPA the documentation that everything was done correctly, both financially and, how the funds were used. I've been told that RLFs are audited at a higher percentage than the other grants, but I don't know if that's true or not.